Hello, I'm Li Hao. I need to take a time to thank all of you for commenting on my video because your comment inspired me to make this video. Well, in the last video, I talked about how to pass Svelte component through the props. And through the comments, I realized that what I actually explained in the video is actually how to pass content through props, not components. And because you guys show me examples that this is actually how you should pass components, and they are actual components, not like HTML contents, elements, things like that. So you know what? It's Svelte question time. You got any questions? I have answers for you, and the question for this video is about how do we actually pass Svelte components through props? How do we pass actual Svelte components through props? Yay! So why do we pass components through props? Well, to be honest, I don't really know. But I believe some of you have this idea of passing components through props for some reasons. I don't have any examples over here, so I borrow an example from our good friend React. So here is a random React library called React Final Form. One of the API they allow is to allow you to pass components through props. So in this case, if you zoom in and take a look, here is how you pass a component through a props, and you can have your components. You can define your components yourself, and this form component will inject some of the props into your component. So props such as handle submit, some arbitrary other props and things like that will be injected from this form component. So I'm going to explore how we can do this in Svelte. Since our inspiration comes from React, I like to take this chance to take a look at how we would write some React components first, and then we are going to convert them to a Svelte component. So here I have my React component written in Code Sandbox. Here, let me zoom in. You can see that there's an app component that creates a form component, which we pass in components over here, right? I have two components, input 1 and input 2. They are slightly different way of implementing them. One is that the first one takes in all the props and try to add them one by one. And inputs 2, we try to just spread the props. To distinct them, I try to add color to be red for the first inputs and color blue to be the second input, so that you know which component we are using right now. Go forwards to the form component. It's alright if you don't understand React code at all. I'm just gonna brief you through, and we're gonna go forwards to our Svelte component. So here in React, these components, what we do is we define another variable called disable. It depends on the value that you have, and then so that we can pass in this additional props from this form component into our component, right? So the way of using this form is you pass in a component over here. So we can create this component in React by directly using this. Okay, so you create this component, and we pass in the disabled props of states of values that we pass in that we created, right? So this is additional props to the underlying inputs component. And for onChange and value comes from the parent, from how you use this form, right? Value and onChange. The slight difference is that within this form, we also explore ways to enhance this onChange. So here we actually define our own onChange, which reads the events value and make it to uppercase before we call the onChange from the props, right? So you pass this onChange and value. So when you use it from here, you can directly set a value, assuming your onChange is being called with a string, ignoring the fact that actually the onChange that the inputs 1 and 2 component receives actually expects to take in event. Right? This is a small This is just to demonstrate that you can enhance the function as well as adding additional props such as disable. So let's take a look at how this would behave. If we type something as your value length greater than 5, then the button, the input will be disabled. So we have another buttons to just reset it, right? So here it goes. If I change it to input 1, this will change to a red color text, and everything still works like this, right? So we're gonna explore how we can write this in Svelte. So here in Svelte, I prepared similar functions. I create the same component names. I have input 1, input 2, and from, right? From, as we say just now, we take in 3 different props: value, onChange, and component. So we have these 3 over here. And then I also took the liberty of defining disable as well. So disable is a reactive statement, declared variable that says that whenever value length is greater than 5, I'm going to disable. Okay, so here let's figure out how we can implement this from, right? So here when we use the form, we use the same way where we pass form value onChange. Then we can just make this more Svelte. From value onChange component will be input 1. So first and foremost, I'm gonna implement input 1 and input 2 first, so that we will take a look at how we can implement for form the form component. So here in React, in input 1, we pass every props one by one, right? So that's what we're gonna do. So let me just copy this and come over here and paste it in. Okay, let's so we are taking 3 props, onChange, export let's value, as well as disable. Okay, so unlike React in Svelte, style is just a string where it should be like HTML. Okay, then everything else you can just pass it in. That's all good. We can make it more. Again, Svelte isn't the right word for it, but you can have some shorthands which is available in Svelte but not in React, which you can just write this way. If your props, the name of the props and the value is the same, the variable in the value is the same, then you can just do a shorthand. Okay. Oh, hold on. Let me type this. Okay. How about input 2? So input 2 spread all the props and then set a style to color blue. So we can do that as well over here. Spread all the props. So for props in Svelte will be a $$ props. It's a magic variable. So I've made a video about this props. If you want to know about how this works, please check out the video. Okay. And so let's set the style to color blue. Okay, and we're all set. Okay, so now let's take a look at, let's now focus on our main topic, which is how we're gonna implement this from component. So here, first thing, to dynamically use component, we'll have to use the Svelte component instead. So here we have a Svelte component, which we can specify this equals to component. Right, and next thing we have over here is that we have another button. So let me just copy this button and come over here. Yep. Okay, so let's take a look over here. Yeah. So here we have onChange from the prop. So we're gonna just call this onChange. So I just now changed the variable onChange from props onChange to onChange, but now I realize that I might need to define our own onChange, right? Just the way we did it in React. So what I'm going to do is I am going to define this variable called onChange, props onChange. And when we export it, we are actually going to export props onChange as onChange. So this is very similar to how you see that how you rename a props to a different local variable in React, right? So what we export as a props in name is called onChange, but the variable getting from the props locally is called props onChange, right? So we have this over here like that. Okay, so this allows us to also define our own onChange over here like this. Okay, so let's see. So here onChange, we are going to pass this onChange over here. So pass our own onChange, and what this onChange do is that it will take in an event, right? It will take in an event, get the event's target value to uppercase, and we're gonna call props onChange with that. Do it over here like this, and then we should also pass in the value, right? Pass in the value, just as we do in React, and should be good. Let's try. So I have my input 1 as a component. Let's try typing, but I don't get it. I don't get the disable. So I think I know why. Because input 1 pass in onChange. onChange works in React, but not in Svelte. Okay, in Svelte you would have to use events like onChange instead. Okay, you can't pass in like the props like this. And actually I would want to pass in onInput instead of onChange because onInput will fire every time when you type. So let's see. Let's type. It's not working yet. Let's see. Events. Let's try to console log over here. Let's see what we get from our event. Spec element. Input event. Target value. I think it's correct. Let's take a look at props onChange. Gonna call this, and onChange we have our value. Let's take a look at what is our new value. Whoops, which is correct. So we update our value. Value should update our form. Then in our form we have disable. Oh, we didn't pass in disable, right? So we're gonna need to pass in disable as well. Let's remove all the console. So let's try. This is disable and reset. This does not reset. Let's see. Reset should call props onChange with. Okay. So again, in Svelte you will have to say click on with a colon, right? So reset, and it works. Yay! So let's take a look at how we use inputs 2 as well. Inputs 2. No disable. Okay, so see, this is the thing about spreading props. We saw that in input 1 we can pass in onChange value, disable, and all these things, but this itself has to be an event. It can't be just a value, right? So this itself we will have to figure out how to you can't spread event listeners in Svelte. So what we can do over here is that we can define export let onChange. We pick out the onChange as props, and we manually pass in onInput to our onChange. And in this case, we don't really have to spread all the props now, right? Our props includes onChange value disable, but we can pick out onChange, so we just spread the rest of it. So the rest would be actually to spread the rest of the props, we can spread restProps instead of props. So let's take a look over here again. Let's try type 5 characters, disable and then we reset, and everything is good. Okay, so here is how you can pass a component through props, and to use it, you use Svelte component. This with that component, you just pass in any props you want. The props can be coming on from your props. It can be props that you created yourself or enhance locally, right? So if you are allowed to pass in more than like these 3 props, right? If you allow to pass in more props than that, for example, I can say type equals number. I want to pass a lot of arbitrary props that I want this to be part of inside as well. Then same thing as how we do for inputs too. We can spread the rest of the props to our Svelte components, right? So we can spread this, spread rest of the props, and now you see that this will turn into an input type of components, input components. So that is how you would do spreading props to your Svelte components. Okay, so I should have ended this video here, but I need to show you that there's more to this than just a normal React component, just converting a React component to a Svelte component, because there's a lot of things that we are doing here does not feel like Svelte at all. So first thing, number 1, is the event listeners, right? So we do this, right? We pass in an onChange into a component. Well, yeah, you can do that, but you can also listen to component events directly. So here you doesn't have to pass in onChange as a props as a function. Passing this function as a props to the inner component to call it, you can actually listen to component events from here. Say for example, I can't listen to input event, okay, from the inner component. Let's change to input once, because there'll be more things that I want to play around with things over here. So here I'm gonna change to input once. So this on input is about forwarding component events. If you're not sure about how to forward component events and what is it about, you can watch my video over here. So okay, so back to this, we forward events from this component, right? Over here we can also forward native events to as a component event, and then we listen from here and forward it again. And here on input, we can do on input and handle it, right? Of course, you say that here when we forward this event from onChange, we also do some processing, right? So we can do that as well. We don't have to forward events. We can come over here and I'm gonna call it onChange, and we can dispatch our new component events. So here I'm gonna import create event listen dispatcher from Svelte, and I'm gonna create the dispatch function, and I'm gonna dispatch a new event called change. Why not? Right, I'm gonna call change so that from the outside I can just listen to onChange, and with this onChange. Right, so here inside I dispatch change, and then also I need to dispatch some data along with this event, which is this. I can just pass all this in over here. There's just dispatch change event. Okay, so over here, if we're listening to an event rather than passing a function, then this will be an event. And to get the value of this event, we will be getting events.details. Okay, so let's try. Let's try, right? So, hold on. Input. We have on input. Okay, that's right. And then over here on change, there's an on input on change. Event target value to uppercase. Okay. So here, I think it's called event.detail. So let's try to type a few characters and then we get disabled. Yay! So we don't have to pass in functions. Like the React way, we can use component events to dispatch events from a component to a component. So if you are using components as props, you have a dynamic components passing in, and you create this dynamic component using Svelte components, you can still listen to events from that component, right? So it could be from component input 1 or could be input 2. You can still listen to events from that component and dispatch a new component events from your components. Okay? So number 2, second thing that I want to point out is that having event listeners and then react to it or update a variable is a very React way of doing things. Sorry, let me correct that. It's because that is a two-way, is a one way of data flowing into the components, and to update you have to pass in a callback, right? In Svelte, you can do that, or you can have another way, which is two-way data binding, meaning you bind a variable to a props. Whenever a props change, you update your variable. Whenever a variable change, you update the props. Right? So we can do that as well in dynamic components you're passing in. So here, I have my value. I can bind that. I have my value from the states. I can bind that value to the value of our inputs. So what this means is that every time when you change the input value changes, you will update this props, or anytime the props changes, will update this value. Okay, and then I come over here in the form, I can bind value over here as well. Okay, so now of course I would have written bind value equals value, but a shorthand to this would be to just write bind value directly. Okay, so that, and what we write just now and this is the same. Okay, now we don't have events. And come over here. Now I can also bind value. So I am directly binding value all the way from input to form and then to our app. Right, just to show you that my value is changing, I'm going to show this value over here outside as well. And as I type, you can see my value propagates from the input of the form to the component, and when change from the component, it will propagate back. So here, the way of doing a button to reset a value will be as straightforward as setting value equals to an empty string. Right, so I try and click and resets the form value. So disable still works, right? The only thing is that right now our variable is not uppercase. So here we need to figure out how we can change that. So instead of binding value to the props directly from here, binding a value to value, which the value is the props, and we update the props, we can bind this value to a local value. Okay, I'm going to just call local value. Let's local value equals to value as the default value of this. Let me just comment things that are no longer in use. Okay, so this is no longer in use. Let me just shove it on top. So this is our local value equals to the value. Okay, and every time we change, we update the local value. So what we can do here next, one step, is we can say that local value equals to local value to uppercase. So every time when local value changes, we're going to update the props, which is the outer value, right? Then here you go, whenever you type the value, so here whenever you type, the local value changes, it will set the props to uppercase. Right, it works. Is it? Well, the local value is still a lowercase, and we click reset, resets the props value, but not updating the local value. Right, so what we can do now is, see, instead of having a local value, what about just updating this value directly? Bind this value. Every time when a value changes, you make it uppercase, right? So now I'm still typing in lowercase, but every time, what happens is that every time value changes, we reassign it to itself again with an uppercase, right? So now things feel simpler now. Every time whenever a value changes, it transforms itself to uppercase, assign it back to itself, and when you change the value from the outside or inside, you get this value propagated, right? So in most cases, this, in a very simple example, this works perfectly fine. But I do have to warn you that doing this is like stepping on a thin ice, where you have a lot of places changing values, right? You have a two-way binding, you have your declarative, reactive declarations, you have your props, all changing to this variable, right? You have your props, your reactive statement, you have a binding. It means that whenever something goes wrong, it's very, very hard to debug and figure out what's going on wrong, right? So if you find yourself to do something like this, and you run to a situation that you have some weird scenarios, then maybe a better way is to still do a one like callback and one-way data flow with a callback style, where you are clear with all the data comes from one place, one source, and to change it, you have to use callback function, right? In that example, only one place owns the variable and updates it, which is in the app, right? And then the value propagates from the app all the way back to the input. So that itself is safer in a sense where you have a clearer picture of how does this data comes from and who is updating it. Right? Of course, you can still use two-way data binding if you want, and I've showed you how to do it, so it's up to you now, okay? So I hope you like this video where I talk about how you can actually passing actual components in Svelte props as you suggested. If you learned a lot from this video, please share this video to your friend and to anyone who needs this video, right? And lastly, I want your help to like this video so that this video gets out there and get more people to watch about it, right? As always, subscribe to my channel so that you get notified when the next video is out. So see ya, bye bye.